Good morning, good evening for the panel members. We'll now start the webinar, Asia Leadership Conference webinar. Today's session is on AI ethics and policy. For many big companies, they all exert a lot of effort to develop AI technology, and these days, ethical aspect has been in the forefront of the discussions. So today we invited experts in this area from big companies and try to hear their experiences. So um, I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I am Hak-Soo Ko. I'm a professor at Seoul National University Law School, and we have three distinguished panel members. I don't see them on my screen right now, but we'll see them in a minute. And to briefly introduce the panel members, uh, Natasha Crampton. She's from Microsoft. Her title is Chief Responsible AI Officer, and as her title indicates, she leads Microsoft's effort to make AI responsible. So the company-wide effort for responsible AI is under her auspices. And in the middle, we have Dr. Norberto Andrade, who is from Facebook. Uh, he is global policy lead for digital and AI ethics. I heard he used to be in the headquarters in California, but just moved to New York. And then third, Dr. Francesca Rossi from IBM. She is IBM's AI ethics global leader. She has been a professor of computer science for over 2 decades, but now she is at IBM and leads IBM's efforts on AI ethics front and related standardization efforts and other efforts. So today's webinar will proceed as follows. We'll give each panel member a few minutes so that we can hear what these companies at front end have been doing in terms of developing ethical and responsible AI technology. And after hearing from the panel members, we'll have discussion sessions as to what has been happening and what will transpire in the future, and what kind of lessons we have been learned so far. So without further ado, I'll ask Natasha to briefly explain the experience at Microsoft. Natasha, please.
Thank you very much. I'm honoured to be a part of this discussion today. The pace at which AI technology is developing is truly remarkable. In fact, AI is really moving faster in 2021 than what we expected at the beginning of 2020, and despite the challenges of the pandemic. And South Korea is really a case in point. Its vibrant AI ecosystem ranked 5th out of 25 countries in a recent analysis produced by the Stanford Institute of Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence. From our perspective, AI should really be celebrated for the benefits that it's bringing to the world, from agriculture to medicine. However, the risks of abuse or misuse are also significant, and the new and complex ethical challenges associated with AI technology require our full attention. We need to make sure that AI is developed and used in ways that warrant people's trust. It's important that we take the time now to have the broad societal conversation about what AI should and shouldn't do, because if we don't, we could find ourselves in a situation only a few years from now where AI has been put to work in ways that create a future that's different to the one that we want. And by then, it's going to be much more difficult to change course because the technology will already be entrenched as part of our lives. One example that stands out to me and that we share is really one of chatbots. I followed the controversy around Luda very closely because Microsoft had a similar issue with Tay, a chatbot that we launched on Twitter a few years ago. We launched the Xiaoice chatbot in China, where it engaged nearly 40 million people with stories and conversation. This led a team of Microsoft researchers and developers to wonder, could a similar chatbot find success in a radically different cultural environment? The team went ahead and created Tay, a chatbot designed to engage with 18 to 24-year-olds in the US and learn through casual conversations with them. Within 24 hours of launching on Twitter, a subgroup of trolls exposed a vulnerability in Tay, teaching it to repeat a storm of offensive and inflammatory language. The Tay chatbot failure became a learning moment for us as a company, highlighting the importance of thinking deeply about context and culture and how humans might interact with innovative new systems. We worked to understand Tay's vulnerabilities, the social and technical challenges that led to Tay's failure, and what we needed to do to limit potential exploitation in the future. Our learnings are encapsulated in some conversational AI guidelines that we made available publicly in late 2018. Tay did undergo a series of stress tests, but its failure reminded all of us that one of the most important parts of AI design is to think about all the potential ways in which humans might use and misuse AI technology. One of the mantras that we often come back to internally is a recognition that AI is built by people and for people. A human-centered mindset is critical. Our experience with Tay also illustrated the importance of considering cultural context in terms of how people might interact with AI. Interestingly, in China, Xiaoice didn't face any of the same issues that Tay faced on Twitter. And in Korea, my understanding is that Luda was initially seen as a success, as over the first several weeks, over 750,000 people engaged in natural and in-depth conversation with the chatbot. From my perspective, these examples raise some valuable questions about how tech companies build AI, how customers use that technology, and how governments should regulate it. We believe that it's a shared responsibility. As a tech company, we take our own responsibility very seriously. Our leadership began discussing responsible AI as early as 2016, and the following year, we established our internal AI Ethics and Effects in Engineering and Research Committee, which is also known as ETHER. In early 2018, we published our AI principles in a book called The Future Computed. Since then, we've added our Office of Responsible AI that I lead and our Responsible AI Strategy and Engineering group to our hub. There are people right across the company working on responsible AI issues in a variety of ways, ranging from researchers to data scientists, user researchers, and policy people. Our approach, which is based on our principles, is focused on proactively establishing guardrails for AI systems so that we can make sure their risks are anticipated and mitigated and their benefits are minimized. In operationalizing our principles, we've developed a governance approach that builds on how we successfully integrated privacy and security and accessibility into our products and services. We've also developed a set of rules, our responsible AI standard, for how we enact our principles. We also understand the importance of engineering systems and tools to help deliver on our commitment to build and use AI responsibly. Although tooling is not capable, particularly in its most technical sense, of this deep human-centered thinking work that needs to be undertaken when conceiving of AI systems, we think it is important to develop repeatable tools and patterns and practices where possible. We see a clear economic benefit behind our investment in responsible AI. We believe an organization's success with AI is not solely dependent on advancing technological capabilities. Business leaders also need to create and execute a responsible approach to AI that instills trust among their stakeholders and effectively manages risks and liabilities. Tech companies taking a principled approach is important, but we must also acknowledge that not all companies share the same views or a common set of principles. The only way to prevent a commercial race to the bottom and to establish a floor of legal protection for citizens is to use regulations to govern new risks that are not accounted for by existing regulation. We really believe that when technology poses large-scale societal risks that are not addressed by existing legal frameworks, it's best for governments to step in and lead the way. Elected officials are best positioned to drive these critical societal conversations that need to inform new regulations and make policy decisions that reflect their society's best interests. Microsoft wants to work with the government of Korea and governments around the world as partners in this crucial ongoing conversation to make sure that the technology we build is used responsibly and delivers the maximum benefits to us all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And well, very quick follow-up question about Tay. Is there a subsequent version of Tay, a new Tay, so to speak, in the US?
No, we don't have a substitute version for Tay in the US today, but what we do have is a framework that we've developed to build out chatbot systems that our customers use, and they're using them today for really important purposes, such as quickly getting information during the pandemic to individuals who might need to go and seek medical treatment or to make available vaccine information. So we have a framework now that we make broadly available to our customers, together with these guidelines that I mentioned earlier about that help our customers implement those bots, the bot framework, in a safe and responsible way.
Okay, thank you. Natasha gave a summary, nice summary of what has been happening at Microsoft during the past, like maybe 4 or 5 years now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So now with Norberto, could you explain what has been happening with Facebook?
Yes, absolutely. And firstly, thank you, Professor Haxoso, for the kind invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be in this event and such distinguished speakers along my side. So I'll give you a quick overview of some of the efforts that Facebook has been undertaking in the field of responsible AI and ethical AI, and I'll structure them into 4, let's say, chapters. So our internal efforts, responsible and ethical development of AI should start at home. Then briefly mention some of the external efforts. Part of those external efforts, I'll just dive a little bit deeper into the work that we're doing specifically on AI governance regulation through a new platform and project that's recently launched. And then a few words at the end about the role of research also in AI ethics and responsible AI. So as a company, and starting with our internal efforts, as a company, we are fully committed to the internal development and deployment of our artificial intelligence and machine learning systems in a way that are safe, fair, transparent, and accountable to the public interest. And the relevance, the prominence of machine learning models, of artificial intelligence systems, we've been building and growing our responsible artificial intelligence capabilities over the last 2 years. And one important milestone of those efforts has been the establishment of our responsible AI team, which is a multidisciplinary team composed by ethicists, social and political scientists, policy experts, obviously engineers and AI researchers that are focused on understanding and working on the very important topics of AI development and deployment, such as transparency, explainability, fairness, robustness, but also privacy. So this team has been in charge of developing frameworks and tools for all other teams that are working with artificial intelligence and machine learning at Facebook to avail themselves of those. So the team does not work directly on products or services. It works for the other teams by setting those frameworks and those tools in order for them to build AI in a responsible way. In terms of external efforts, we also recognize the critical role that international and intergovernmental organizations, but also civil society and other industry peers have in ensuring the ethical development and deployment of artificial intelligence. So we've been part of an effort on that front to promote cross-disciplinary debate and best practices among these different stakeholders, but also to try to identify and align on consensus-based solutions. So let me give you two examples of that work. One has been the work that we've been doing at the OECD. So we were part and an active member of the IGO group, which was the working group that was tasked to draft the OECD's recommendation on AI and its AI principles, which was actually the first international guidelines for the design and use of AI. We've been following up on that work, and we are now part of the OECD network of experts on AI, the one AI within the OECD's AI Policy Observatory. And what we're doing now is departing from that foundational work of establishing the AI principles. We are now working on how to define and provide practical guidance of how to implement those principles. The other example has been the work that we've been doing also at international level with the UNESCO, where we've been contributing to the development of the recommendations of AI. So we were part and participating in the consultation on the ethics of AI, and we've been contributing to the draft recommendations, which are expected to be adopted later this year. In terms of external efforts, a couple of words on the work that we've been doing at the governance and regulatory level. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have recently launched a program and a global strategic initiative that basically promotes and deploys experimental regulatory efforts in the field of new and emerging technologies, but with a specific focus on AI. The name of the program is Open Loop, and basically through that consortium of stakeholders, work with governments, with other tech companies, but also with academics and civil society. We engage in different methodologies on how to do experiment at the AI governance level. So we can, for example, support the evaluation and improvement of existing legal frameworks by participating in sandbox exercises. But we also, through this platform, are able to co-create and test entirely new governance frameworks through what we call policy prototyping programs. We have engaged several governments in different regions of the world. We have one in APAC where we're actually collaborating with the Singaporean government, with the Infocom's Media Development Authority, where we are actually helping them test their AI governance model framework by testing the guidance and the provisions that they have on transparency and explainability. And we're doing this alongside 12 APAC AI companies in order to improve and foster the adoption of that framework in the region. We have also other engagements in LATAM with Mexico, and we've finished actually our first policy prototyping program in Europe, where we tested a specific risk assessment approach to AI. And I'm happy throughout the debate to shed some more light on the goals, objectives, and the details of some of that work. But as my initial overview, I would just finish also with an important element of our AI ethics efforts, which is research. And here I must mention the institute that we created back in 2015, the Facebook AI Research Fair, which is our in-house AI research division. So basically what FAIR does is to conduct both foundational, fundamental, and applied research to advance the state of art of artificial intelligence. So they tackle the long-term academic challenges and inquiries surrounding AI. And they do that in a very open way. So they work very closely with other research institutions, with other academic institutions, and they applied an open model format to all of the different of their work, collaborating with the international research community, publishing all of their results in various forms, but also releasing data sets, models, and tools to advance the global AI research community. We've also believed that the main and intricate questions posed by AI should be answered not by the companies themselves. We certainly can contribute to, but we need to have independent academic research tackling those questions and those issues. And with that in mind, we partnered back in 2019 with the Technical University of Munich to launch the creation of an independent Institute for Ethics in AI that has been conducting independent and evidence-based research on this topic. And the hope is to be able to provide tangible frameworks, methodologies, and governance approaches to advise AI developers and practitioners, and aligning on best ethical practices. So I'll stop here in terms of the overview. I'm happy to delve deeper in any of those later on during the debate.
Thank you very much. It's a fairly extensive list of activities. Many of the audience members would be nicely surprised to hear that not Microsoft and Facebook and all those well-known companies have been doing so many different things under the umbrella of AI ethics. So we'll go a little bit deeper later on, but before doing that, we'll now hear from IBM. Francesca, please give us an overview of what has been happening at IBM.
Thank you. Okay, so at IBM, we started, like many other companies, with our principles around AI ethics. So we call them the principles of trust and transparency. And basically, they were principles that were very high level already in 2017. They were just saying very simple but very clear things. So first of all, that for us, AI should augment human capabilities to make good decisions rather than being an external and autonomous entity. Second thing is that the data belongs to, and the insights for the data belongs to whoever provides the data. And the third thing, that AI and the other technology must be transparent and explainable. So once we defined those principles, we immediately understood that, yes, they were nice, they were simple, very high level, very clear, but we needed to go further than that, because our developers, our clients are not really doing much with the principle. We needed to go, beyond the principles, be much more concrete. So immediately we said, okay, we call them principles of trust and transparency, because trust is a very important concept that people using AI are really looking for. What does it mean then to trust an AI system? Actually, not just to trust the technology, but to trust the whole ecosystem around the technology. And so we then spelled out what trustworthy AI means into several properties of the technology, and which are the issues that we mostly focus on. One of them is privacy, of course, but also fairness, explainability, transparency, and robustness. So once we had defined that setting, then we started a lot of different activities, and as was said, by other speakers earlier on, the activities were not just technologically based. There are some solutions that have to do with building the right tools, whether open source or proprietary tools that can be used by everybody, by our clients, by our ecosystem, and so on, to address those issues, like tools to detect and mitigate bias, tools to build explanations in AI models, and so on. So those are very important, and those tools were defined defined by the research division and then transported into the business units and the units that define the products and build the products for us and for our clients. But then we also understood that the tools were not enough. So we have a lot of activities around education, material, initiatives for our developers, for the whole company. We have mandatory educational modules for everybody around the privacy, but also around all the pillars of trust in AI. And then we really understood that, as was said earlier, the people are at the center of this, building AI, using AI, so education with our clients. And more our clients actually were asking us what we were doing around trustworthy AI, around AI ethics. So these are some of the activities. And then, since IBM is such a large company, like the other two that already spoke, and of course we had some challenges in trying to coordinate everything without having a centralized governance structure. And so that's why already starting in 2018, we defined the AI ethics board, the internal board that has representatives from all the divisions of the company, research, products, services, communication, marketing, policies, so all the divisions, and not just representative from the divisions, but really people that are at the highest level of executives in the division, because we wanted the board to have decision power, to whatever the board decides, then these people can go home in their division and actually implement what has been decided. So the goal of this board is really to coordinate all these activities, make sure that there are no gaps, but also no redundancies, no contradictions, a uniform language. For example, we built internally a glossary around AI ethics so that everybody can use the terms that have the same meaning for everybody. So really to coordinate and make a uniform environment and culture around AI ethics. Another important thing that the board does is also to balance a top-down governance framework with the recognition and the identification of bottom-up initiatives that happen in every region of the world and in every office around the world at IBM, of people that really build something locally around AI ethics, like, I don't know, a chatbot to help our division, our offering managers to understand whether there are AI ethics issues with an offering. So things that are built locally, and then the AI ethics boards evaluate and brings possibly to scale to the level of the whole company. Another important thing is also to discuss and evaluate perspective offerings to our clients that can raise some significant AI ethics issues, whether around fairness or robustness or privacy and so on. And so the business units we have put together a protocol where the business units can do an assessment of whether there is enough concern to bring to the attention of the AI ethics board. And then the board discusses with this offering manager and the team building the product to be delivered to our clients, and discusses three things: the properties of the technology, like whether it follows these trustworthy pillars, the uses that the client would like to do of this technology, and also the client himself and the context. And all these three dimensions have to be evaluated positively by the board and by the offering managers and the team and so on, in order for the offering to go through and to go to the client. So it's very important to build knowledge and get familiarity about what is acceptable for IBM, what we are comfortable with and what we are not comfortable with. Also the time for all this experience that we have recently in in a lot of different offerings that we have evaluated, most of the times, we business units understand what is not acceptable, so they don't even try to propose something that is not acceptable. But for things that are not clear, then they come to the board. We discuss it together, and usually sometimes we did not accept the deal, and the offering did not go through. But most of the time, we put additional constraints, if they are suitable, in the contractual agreement to make sure that really the technology has the right properties and is used and deployed in the right way. We also value a lot this external partnership that we have. Some of them were mentioned already previously, but we really think that it's very important to understand that not any single company, no matter how large, how old, and with how much experience, can define by itself the best practices, the issue, can understand the issues, and so on. So to learn together with others, and not just other companies, but also all the other stakeholders, we have been involved in many of these external partnerships. We are collaborating, of course, with academia through our research collaboration, for example, with building the MIT IBM lab or the Notre Dame Tech Ethics Lab, but also with the multi-stakeholder organization, like one of them that also Microsoft and Facebook are founding members, just like IBM, which is the partnership on AI, where there are many of the main tech companies, but also all the other stakeholders, so UN agencies, civil society organizations, consumer rights associations, and so on, with the idea of building together and understanding together the real issues and the best practices. Other collaboration that we have are with the World Economic Forum to really connect to other companies and governments as well on various issues around AI ethics, as well as we participate with, we help and advise governments. Like, for example, we were part of the high-level expert group on AI of the European Commission that delivered the ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI in Europe, and is delivered like the self-assessment list that is being cited also by the European Commission in their white paper on regulating AI, and will probably be part of the future regulation that the European Commission will deliver in April, so very soon. So in general, about regulation, we also think that the co-creation of regulation between governments and companies is the right approach. And we have this idea that the regulation should be following this risk-based and precision regulation approach. So to understand what not technology, but what applications of the technology are high risk, and to regulate them in the right way, in a precision way, understanding, not broad classes, but also singular applications if they are high risk, and what can be done to regulate them. We also, again, we like really this global, being a global company and being AI global as well. We experience the difference in culture in the different region of the world, within the company itself, and in our ecosystem in the various regions of the world. And so that's an important, I think, dimension to consider also when evaluating the different priorities and the different nuances of this implementation of the principles. So, but the bottom line is that I think that in all these companies that are present here and in many others, we now understand that the period of defining principles is gone, is done. Now we need really to spend time operationalizing these principles and make them concrete within our own company, within their ecosystem, but also in general in all these multi-stakeholder initiatives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francesca.
Thank you very much, Francesca.
There was howling, but now, yeah. Well, one thing I realized is that all these companies have pretty large teams, exclusive teams dedicated to ethical aspects of AI. Somebody has a problem with Roland. Yeah, I'll go on. For large companies leading AI technology, having putting a lot of efforts and resources on AI, it's really important. And going back, I mean, given that this webinar is for the general audience who don't really who don't necessarily have expertise on ethical aspects of AI. To get started, I think, well, better to give a flavor as to why AI is important in the market, so that the audience can have a general sense as to how large is the market and how fast it is growing. That's one kind of question, and the second question is why AI ethics is important, or how significant is it, or is it becoming? If you have some numbers, even if in the ballpark range, anyone can volunteer to give an answer to that aspect, so that the general audience can have some sense as to why these companies are putting so much effort in that front.
So I can try. I mean, I think that in a recent study that I read, there was a number saying that the AI market is going to grow to $16 trillion in 2030, which, of course, to the general audience, maybe, and to me as well, is not really, doesn't say much, except that it's a very big number. But I think that AI can, besides the number, I mean, we already see that AI can support and improve many operations within the company and many services to individuals as well in our personal and professional life. So there are so many tasks that can be supported by AI and can be done better, faster, or in a more optimal way by AI-based tools. And so that's something that can help us, make better decisions on many different sectors. Can help us, for example, reach a vision of the future that is, for example, given by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that can touch every community, in not just companies, but really everybody in the world, with those goals. And again, okay. And then, of course, one has to think, yes, AI has this potential because of the feature of the AI systems and the capabilities of the machine learning and the other AI techniques. But of course, it has to be used, developed, deployed in the best way. And AI is not a neutral technology. It's not just a matter of avoiding some misuse. It's also a technology that needs to be developed with the right properties, like fairness, explainability, and so on, because otherwise then it doesn't give the full potential of what it can give to human beings and to our planet, our environment. And so it's very complex environment to understand how to put together all these pieces, the design, the development in the right way, the use in the right way. And again, as we said, AI can do a lot, but humans have to be educated in what's the right and the best way to use this technology for good, for good purposes in our society.
Okay. Anyone else? If you can put in some figures or examples.
I can give a couple of examples of how AI is not only important, it's just crucial for Facebook. I mean, the Facebook that you see would not exist without AI. AI is really the infrastructural component behind all of our engineering efforts and behind practically all of our products and services, from the way that we rank content and structure newsfeed to the way that we deliver ads, but also very importantly, the way that we ensure the safety of our community, we use AI to proactively identify violating content on our platform, and we have actually what we call a community standards enforcement report that gives some very amazing numbers of the extent to which we use AI to detect and proactively remove that type of harmful content from our platform before users reporting or sometimes seeing it. So not having to actually rely on users reporting it, which can take its time, which cannot be accurate, and actually being able to remove that content in a very accurate way is something that is only possible through AI and machine learning. Also, an example of how AI played an important role during this period of the pandemic, the way that we've used AI to generate forecast maps of the spread of the virus, how we use AI to also combat misinformation about information related to COVID, or using natural language processing and the ability to perform automated translations of important content related to the pandemic. There are just a few examples of how AI has been important, not only for us to actually deploy and offer our services, but also to contribute to society in such a delicate period that we're going through with the pandemic. So those are just a couple of examples. And in terms of also the importance and relevance of AI, AI as a way to delegate, decision power to machines. It's not only delegating those decisions; it's delegating also the values and the assumptions and our views of the world to the machines to actually do those decisions. So it's very important to do this properly, and as Francesca mentioned, to have always those properties in mind of doing this in a way that is safe, that is fair, that is transparent. So that's why AI ethics has exploded in terms of interest and attention, because of the importance of doing this right.
Just to
Thank you.
add, oh,
Natasha, yeah, continue.
Oh, thank you. Just to add to Norberto's last point, I think the reason why AI ethics is of the moment and such an important issue to think about right now is that we need to understand that AI is infusing machines with the sort of capabilities that were previously just reserved to humans. So the ability to see and to hear and to reason and to perceive. And as computers start to behave more like humans, then we've got to ask, well, what is the impact of that on human beings? And there are lots of choices that we need to make along the way. We can make choices to decide that all of those AI-powered systems should treat people fairly. People should get the same quality of service from an AI system, and for the system not to behave differently for different demographic groups. We can decide that it is right for human beings who are subject to decisions by AI systems to understand how and why those decisions were made, so that they know information that's relevant to maybe a decision like, can they buy a house? Can they get a loan? So these are all choices that we have to make about how we want AI to be affecting our lives and in what ways. And this really comes back to my earlier point that, one way of thinking about these complex issues that honestly have sort of bedeviled philosophers for many years when it gets down to some of the ethical and sort of traditions and choices that we have to make, is really just to get back to the simple proposition of, AI is made by humans and for humans, and we get to make choices about how we want it to show up in our lives. And I think now's the time to be having those conversations so that we can inform, what our futures look like.
Thank you. Well, there are so many things on the plate, so many issues on the plate, I think, so that our discussion is somewhat abstract to a general audience, I think, so that in order to help them understand what kind of issues are out there, it will be helpful to give specific examples if you can. So on that aspect, I would ask Natasha a question, and other panel members can give example or episode if you have encountered. Natasha's overview at the outset, you mentioned Luda, which is a chatbot service in Korea, which was under controversy after it got had popular attention among the general population. It spit out hate speech or sexual discrimination, that kind of socially acceptable expressions were out there, and became very controversial. And you mentioned the Tay episode, or in China, Xiao Ice. And the question is, what kind of say screening or you do, or how specifically fairness consideration or kind of other ethical aspects we talk about, discrimination, fairness, or trust, transparency. All these terms are in itself very good and nice, but could sound very abstract. So unless it's given the context or explained in a specific example to the general audience, you could sound like they are just throwing out big keywords with not necessarily having substance. So if you can give specific examples so that, say, high school student can understand, oh, yeah, fairness is important, and these companies are, considering that aspect through the product development process. So could you explain?
Sure. Let me use the example of the chat guidelines that we've developed and talk through some of those sort of specific recommendations that we make there and how they would apply to a chatbot, because I think that will help to make it all a little bit more concrete. So one of the starting points for us is that if you're a human being and you're interacting with a chatbot, you should probably know and be told by the system that you're actually interacting with a chatbot, with an artificial intelligence powered machine. Because as human beings, it's important for us to know the difference between interacting with another person and interacting with a machine. So we would say it's a good practice, if you're building a chatbot, to tell your users that you are interacting with an automated machine, right? And sometimes that can just be done in a very straightforward way. For example, by just saying, hi, you're talking with Cortana, an AI-powered bot. So you try and communicate, first of all, you're not, even though the bot might have quite human-like speech, you're actually communicating with a machine and not with a human. And that's important because your expectations as a human being change when you know that you're interacting with a human. Now, you also want to make sure with a chatbot that you're not asking the bot to work in every situation, in every circumstance, because that is likely to get you into trouble. And this is the reason why, whether it's Luda or Tay, they are learning, both of those bots are learning from a vast amount of information that's likely available in the web and elsewhere. And the challenge with that information is that society is not perfect. When we write down our thoughts, we can have biased thoughts, we can have angry thoughts, and worse. And what these systems do is that they are learning from all of that data that's out there already, that already embodies, some of society's biases. And if you're not careful about testing your bot to see how it behaves in different circumstances, then you can end up just taking all of those biases from society and amplifying them. So what you need to do is you need to think very carefully about, what has this bot been learning from? What are some of the potential sources of unfairness in that data, and how could they be amplified in this particular setting? So often we teach our teams to address fairness challenges by thinking really carefully, is this an appropriate task to be asking this particular AI system? Because it might be fine for a bot to have quite a structured conversation. For example, we have bots here in the US at the moment that are being used to exchange information and quickly get information to citizens about, this is where you should go for a COVID test. This is where you should go for a vaccination. That's quite a predictable series of conversations. You know that the conversation is going to involve asking a question about, where are you located? Where is your local vaccination center? So the whole nature of the conversation is quite constrained and known in advance, and that allows you to put some safeguards around it and make sure that whether it's Natasha asking the question or Francesca or Norberto, everybody's getting a consistent experience that gets them the information that they need. So thinking carefully about data and recognizing that these systems are trained on data, and so they will learn the patterns in that data, and then thinking about how you use them, making sure that you're communicating, that you're interacting with a human, with a machine and a human. These are important things to actually build that trust, and those are kind of practical steps that we would ask our teams to take to communicate transparently about the fact that they're interacting with a bot, to think carefully about the data, to test the data to make sure it works well for different people, and to always have some sort of system to what is happening with the bot in the real world, because there will be situations where unpredictable things happen, and you need a monitoring system to be able to learn those challenges and then have good systems for acting on them promptly.
Okay, thank you. Other panel members, if you have comments.
I can give another example about fairness. So suppose that you want to go to the bank, ask for a loan, and your request for a loan will be evaluated, and then it will be either accepted or rejected. So, and suppose that this person making this decision is supported by an AI-powered system that helps this person make this decision. So, usually, how is that AI system built? So, it's built from probably data coming from examples of loan applications, and the developer has collected these examples, and for each one of the loan application he has told the system whether it should be accepted or rejected based on the content of the application. So it gives these examples with the correct response to the system, and then the system generalizes using machine learning, various kinds of techniques, in order to behave well also in other loan applications that has never seen before in the examples. No, so suppose that by mistake or unconscious, behavior, all the examples that have been given to the system to then use to the generalize contain examples of loan applications coming from women that are or should be correctly rejected. So you give these examples, and then you give examples of loan application coming from men, and correctly those should be accepted. So suppose that these are the examples that the human being gave to the AI system. Then of course the AI system will immediately pick up these understand this correlation between the two features. One is the gender of the person making the application, and the one is the acceptability or not of the loan application. We'll make that correlation, and we'll use that correlation when deciding on other loan application that has never seen before. And of course, that can generate unfair behavior, because if this strange scenario that I told you, which comes about, then the system, of course, will understand that loan applications for women need to be rejected and for men need to be accepted, which of course is wrong in general, but for those examples was the right. So it's very important, if you don't want unfair behavior of an AI system, that the developer understands well what are the properties of the data that are given to the AI system to be trained to then use to generalize. Then let me go one step further. So suppose that you are careful about the data that you give for training, and suppose that at the end the accuracy, so the amount of time, the percentage of time that the system is correct in making the decision about accepting or not the loan application, is the same for men and for women. So now you say, okay, no, now it behaves fairly because it has the same accuracy for the two kinds portion of the population. But it still could be unfair based on other notions of fairness. So this is just to tell you that there is not just one single notion of fairness, but there may be many. For example, even if you have the same accuracy for men and women application, it's still, for example, 90%. So 10% of the time it makes an error, but 90% of the time is correct. But you have to go and look also at these 10% of times that it may make an error, because the errors may be very different depending on whether it's a woman or man, so the two parts of the population. For example, it could be that for one category, it could have a lot of false positives, so it should accept instead it reject, or vice versa, and instead for the other category it will be completely the opposite. So according to this more elaborate investigation, you may say that is not fair. So to tell you that really there is not one definition of fairness, and it's very important when developing an AI system to understand where it's going to be used, how it's going to be used, in which context, because that will tell the developer what's the right definition of fairness to be considered.
Thank you. I totally agree with your point. A typical scenario in this discussion is, say, lawyers or philosophers would say AI should be fair. And then developer engineers, they would answer, which fairness, fairness metric are you talking about? There are so many different kinds of fairness notions. So now we'll need to have that sort of discussions. And I think to Norberto, I was to ask a little bit different question. I mean, in developing these principles and processes within the company, all of you, I'm pretty sure, were engaged in discussions internally within the company and also with outside stakeholders. And fairness, for example, have so many different meanings to different people. So if you talk about some aspect of fairness, some, for example, civil society groups would come up with different notion and claim something else. And how do you engage all the different voices and stakeholders, whether from the outside of the company or inside the company? Within the company, for example, there could be a PhD in philosophy or ethics, and he or she may claim we should do this ethical. We should focus on this ethical aspect of AI technology, and that sort of view could possibly be in conflict with some group of engineers. And I see some companies have tendency to have engineers who have their own worldview and try to have their product out there as soon as possible, or some engineers view performance, i.e., accuracy foremost, and downplay ethical aspect. And there could be conflicts of views or different views, and how, if you have episode or rewarding experience, or difficult challenges that you encountered on that front, if you can share, that could be very helpful.
Yes, absolutely. I'll give you an example of the importance of ethical conversations in the world of product development. And I'll give you an example of a product that I was involved, being part of the AI policy team. I've been doing also product counseling, meaning that I'm part of a cross-functional process with members from different teams, where we work hand in hand with product managers, with engineers, with data scientists in reviewing the products, the applications that they're working on. So I'll give you an example, and it was such a good example that I actually pushed this conversation to be converted into an academic article that we eventually managed to publish. And this has to do with the application of AI and machine learning to support our efforts regarding suicide prevention. So we've been working on suicide prevention for over a decade, but most recently there were important conversations on how and to what extent should we be using AI and machine learning to improve that process, and how could we use natural language processing to detect expressions of suicidal ideation, and have a process in place through which we could intervene if we would detect that there was actually a clear and imminent someone taking their lives. So we published an article that actually details the different ethical considerations and the delicate trade-offs that went into reviewing and tweaking the way that we should be implementing and applying artificial intelligence to this product. And I say trade-offs because I think this is a key word. And Francesca mentioned very correctly that we are definitely done with a period of defining principles. We need to understand how operationalize those principles. And it's important once we look at canonical principles that have been listed by so many different organizations, like privacy and safety and transparency and accountability, we need to understand that sometimes they might be actually in tension with one another. So it's not a zero-sum game where you just optimize for all of those principles. There might be some collision, some clashes, or at least some tension between or among some of those principles. So what we tried to demonstrate in that article was how profound philosophical and ethical questions can be actually mapped all the way to the specific and concrete engineering and product decisions. So we listed a number of ethical questions that we discussed, and what were the values that were animating some of those conversations. So we started actually by discussing the issue of legitimacy. Should we as a company be in the business of preventing suicides, of like saving lives, of going beyond what we are strictly supposed to do as a company? So this was an important question of what was the justification for us to do that. And we started with that very foundational question, and we ended up confirming that we do have a role and a responsibility to do this. And actually, that role and responsibility was brought to us by external stakeholders, by suicide prevention organizations that told us and made us aware that we do have the resources and the instruments to actually solve or at least contribute to mitigating this problem. So we started actually with that discussion. The other was about some tension amongst principles, and one would be privacy and safety, and safety in terms of efficacy, how efficacious, how effective our system can be, and at the same time being a system that is not intrusive and respectful of people's privacy expectations. So how can we deploy a suicide prevention system that is effective in keeping people safe, but at the same time in respecting their privacy? And this is a very challenging question. And what is interesting about our discussions was to understand how do we solve those questions through concrete product design and engineering decisions. So just to give you a quick example, we decided that some communication flows have higher expectations of privacy than others, and that we should actually just enable the machine learning, our suicide prevention classifier, to operate in certain communication flows. So, for example, if we're talking about a post that is addressed to a large group of friends, we believe that there is legitimacy to actually have the system classifying and detecting suicidal ideation. But instead, if we're talking about one-to-one communications, I think there's a high expectation of privacy there. And for example, we do not enable the suicide prevention classifier to operate in that circumstance. So those, what could seem like little tweaks, product decisions, are really at the heart of how you go about striking a proper and appropriate balance amongst those values. The other discussion that we had was about human in the loop, of what would be the scope of human intervention, and to the extent that we should rely or not on automation in reviewing reports coming from humans. So other users reporting cases of suicide, should we actually have accurate automated systems reviewing and deciding if those reports are actually about suicide prevention or not? And we decided that given the gravity and the importance of those reports, and even if we do have high levels of accuracy with our models, we believe that it's still important to have the human in the loop and to have that element of accountability through a human reviewing and deciding on each specific case. So this is just an example of how important it is to actually have ethicists and people that are trained and have solid backgrounds in these areas, but also relying on experts. So the last thing that I would say to answer your question is the fact that we do have a privacy review program in place through which that is cross-functional, that is actually our vehicle through which we implement our privacy by design principles, and through which we gather different perspectives by teams like legal team, the public policy team, the safety team, communications. And what we do through the public policy team is to actually reach out to external stakeholders, to policymakers, to lawmakers, to academics, to civil society. So we, as part of the public policy team, are the ones that go outside and understand how our discussions and how we're thinking about the product, how does that actually resonate with the external world, and what feedback should we be seeking and bringing back to Facebook and incorporated that accordingly. So the element of and that's why I believe the work that I do is at least in my opinion exciting, because I get to build that bridge with the external world and making sure that what we're building, what we are deploying has been socialized, has been discussed, has counted with important input and feedback from external stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. Well, there are so many things going on, so it's difficult to cover many different aspects within the limited time that we have. I wish we had much more time, but in any event, I'll give each just 1 minute for the concluding remark. We're already close to an end for the seminar. For the concluding remark, I would ask you to give a very general overview as to, say, to the layperson, why is AI important? To a general audience, or could be to a startup, could be the government, or could be all citizens. Why is AI growing so fast, or why is it important to have responsible or fair AI, and what will take place in the coming 1 or 2 or several years on that front. So with that, would Natasha go first?
Sure. To a general audience, I'd say, look, I'm optimistic about the potential of AI. You see AI in, the the way in which you log on to your devices using facial recognition. AI is powering your searches on the internet. It's powering the maps that you use to navigate in your daily lives. And as we get further and further into the deployment of AI, it's going to have more and more impacts on your lives. And I think, as I said, I'm optimistic, but we have to now make these choices to put in place the safeguards to make sure that it benefits everybody. And I think we've seen, even in the last year, as we've seen, AI help with the pandemic and trying to sequence the vaccines, understand the disease further. These are all really exciting future possibilities that we should prepare for now too. I do think it's incumbent on companies such as ours to make sure that we are building AI responsibly and that it does benefit everyone. I think starting with principles is great, but the detailed practices and those individual decisions that are made at the product level, just like Norberto outlined, are exactly the kind of thing that we need. I would conclude by saying, I do think it's important for you to also participate in the societal conversation about this future that we want to create. There are choices. You participating in that conversation is going to help make sure that those choices are aligned with your values. And I think the more perspectives we have involved in those discussions, the better.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Francesca?
Sure. Yeah, so I think we said, all of us, that AI is really crucial in helping us address many difficult problems, like we have seen, in the recent pandemic situation, to find vaccines, to find test molecules that would be good to counteract the power of the disease, and so on. And in general, I think that AI is very good at making sense of huge amounts of data. Currently, we are surrounded by data in all our activities. We generate all sorts of data. We find data everywhere. And so the fact that this technology is good in interpreting the data and making predictions out of the data, that can be really very, very useful in all our activities. Now, of course, as we said already, we have to make sure that the technology understands what our values are. So we have to find ways to communicate, to understand ourselves what our values are, and to communicate in a suitable way to the machine, so that the machine, when used, when deployed, can behave in a way that is aligned to our values. Fairness is one of our values, and we already saw just for fairness is very complex, many different definitions, many different thresholds, all sorts of things. And so only a societal and multi-stakeholder conversation can help those that are going to build the technology to understand what the right values are. But I would like to end on a more positive note, also saying that AI can also help ourselves to be be more aligned to the values that we really care about. AI can alert people when it sees that they are deviating for certain principles or certain conduct guidelines in a certain task that they're doing. So AI itself, not only we have to make sure that AI, we embed our values in AI, but once we do that, then AI can also help ourselves be better, improved, make better decision, be more conscious about our values. And of course, as I always said, the goal of our companies or whoever is deploying or developing a technology is not to improve the technology, is to improve ourselves, and to improve our society through the use of technology and conversations around the technology. So the technology itself can help us improve ourselves.
Thank you. Roberto?
So I would conclude with just a couple of thoughts. I think, firstly, what I would say that one of the main challenges of AI is not the fact that is this just automated being on its own, where it looks like something just happens almost magically. The challenge of AI is actually being profoundly human. AI learns from human data, is used by humans, is inspired and derived from human assumptions, from definition of what our goals and decisions as a society we should be taking. So the more we look inside to us as humans, the more we'll understand AI, and the more we'll have the opportunity to actually use AI to improve upon the current situation. So there are obviously very important concerns around the opacity of AI systems, around possible discrimination and fairness issues. But we do have the opportunity to build the systems in a way that improve upon the situation, that can actually surpass some of those concerns around fairness. There are important techniques that we can use to make them more transparent and explainable to users. So I think that the right departure point is to acknowledge the humanity of AI and use that as a way to improve the status quo. The other thing that I would say that is also important to bear in mind is that AI is not just an exclusive territory of technologists. Obviously, it's a complicated technology, and there are many technical aspects involved. But it's so important to have social scientists also looking and understanding better the systems and seeking their input into understanding what are the assumptions, what are the goals, how do we actually attain proper balances and trade-offs amongst values and principles of AI. So it's impossible for us to build those AI systems without the input of lawyers, of economists, of political scientists, historians, anthropologists. That is not that is something that is crucial for us to get this right. And the last thought is that AI ethics, and this goes to the point that was confirmed by Natasha, is that I think AI ethics, and I said this a couple of times before, lives in small decisions. So the big decisions that AI is asked to take will live in small engineering tweaks, and understanding what are those decisions and how do we talk and how do we actually oversee the work of engineers and technical folks in understanding how those products work. That is the trick to get the AI ethics right. So I would finish with AI being profoundly human, not being an exclusive territory of technologists, and being and living in actual small decisions.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I take all the panel members' concluding point to the effect that we are, in a sense, in a inflection point, in the sense that AI itself is not necessarily or exclusively technology, but more now human aspect is important, or societal aspect is important, because the technology is being more and more embedded into all different types of products that we use in our daily lives, so that how it impacts the whole society is increasingly more and more important. So, well, we ran out of time. Thank you so much, sparing your precious time with us. I wish we had ample time, but we'll have to see the next opportunities for further engagement. Well, with that, we'll finish the webinar. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.